Some people hear about Kundalini in a book or a podcast. Others experience something strange after meditation, breathwork, or a psychedelic trip. Some dismiss it as fantasy until their own body starts behaving in ways they can't explain. For some, Kundalini starts quietly. For others, it hits without warning. Your body begins to shake or twitch for no reason. You feel pressure in your head or chest. You wake up at night with your heart racing. Sometimes your whole body feels hot or suddenly freezing cold. Then there are the things that don't show up on medical tests. You see lights or colors when your eyes are closed. You hear buzzing, ringing, or strange sounds in your head. You feel waves of fear, sadness, or energy moving through you. Sometimes you feel outside your body, disconnected, alone. You don't know what's happening, and no one around you seems to understand. So you begin to ask yourself, am I going mad or waking up? This video is for both kinds of people. Those who are simply curious and those who are silently struggling. Because Kundalini isn't just an idea from ancient yoga. It's a real experience that can change your life. And few people understood this better than Dr. Sannella, a psychiatrist who spent years studying it from both science and spirituality. Dr. Sannella wasn't a mystic or a guru. He was a psychiatrist, a man trained in science, psychology, and clinical observation. And yet his work led him into territory that medicine still doesn't fully understand. He met people, ordinary individuals, who were experiencing something deeply unusual. Their lives were being disrupted by a force they couldn't explain. These weren't fantasies or mental illnesses. What they were going through was real. It could be seen, measured, described. And slowly, Sannella came to recognize what was happening, the ancient energy of Kundalini, awakening in the modern world. But it didn't look anything like the idealized stories in spiritual books. There was no sudden enlightenment, no permanent state of peace, no divine glow. Instead, there were unexpected body movements, overwhelming emotions, and moments that felt like losing control. And yet, behind the confusion and discomfort, something more profound was unfolding. Something was being rewired, from the nervous system to the personality itself. It was painful. It was frightening. But it was also transformative. It wasn't just a breakdown. It was the beginning of a deeper reorganization of how a person feels, thinks, and relates to themselves and the world. Dr. Sannella gave this experience a name, the physio-Kundalini syndrome. Not a syndrome in the way we usually think of disease, not a disorder, not a malfunction, but a process, a powerful transformation that begins deep in the body and nervous system and moves upward through the mind and sense of self. In many cases, this awakening begins without warning. It doesn't ask for permission. People don't always seek it out. It simply happens. For some, the changes were mild and manageable. For others, they were overwhelming, physically, emotionally, and psychologically. Sannella carefully documented the wide range of symptoms people reported. Among the most common physical sensations, tingling or electric currents running up the spine or across the limbs, waves of heat or cold moving through the body, sudden involuntary movements or tremors, especially during rest or meditation, shifts in breathing patterns, changes in appetite, or disrupted sleep, feelings of pressure in the head, especially around the forehead or crown, flashes of light, vivid inner visuals, or swirling patterns with eyes closed, hearing sounds, buzzing, ringing, whispers, or tones with no external source, and at times slipping into altered states where the boundaries of identity start to dissolve. Emotionally, people found themselves swinging between extremes, sudden tears, joy, fear, or anger, without any clear reason. Psychologically, some described feeling like their old self was fading away, as if they were shedding an outdated version of who they were. To many doctors, these symptoms might have looked like a psychiatric crisis, but Sannella saw something different. He believed these weren't signs of mental illness. They were signs of deep inner change. The body, the brain, even the unconscious mind were being pushed to reorganize themselves. A deeper intelligence was at work, something evolutionary, not just in the physical sense, but at the level of the psyche, and maybe even the soul. And here's the paradox. Kundalini isn't a new discovery. It's been known for thousands of years. Hindu sages spoke of it as a coiled serpent at the base of the spine. Sufi mystics describe burning love rising through the heart, Christian saints wrote of divine fire and inner purification. Taoist alchemists called it inner elixir or life force. This energy has been part of the human experience across cultures, but always within systems that provided structure, teachers, traditions, disciplines, and context. Today, that's changed. Kundalini is awakening in people who've never heard the word, in people who never stepped into an ashram, never followed a guru, never imagined something like this could happen. The modern world has made ancient practices more accessible than ever. Meditation is a phone app. Breathwork is a weekend retreat. Psychedelics are a growing trend. But something important has been lost. We've opened the door to altered states, but we've thrown away the map. So what happens when a force once approached with reverence, preparation, and deep commitment suddenly erupts in the nervous system of someone with no idea what's happening, no spiritual foundation, no mentor, no language for the inner changes they're going through? That's what we're exploring here. Not just the symptoms, not just the fear, but the meaning behind it all, and how, if approached with understanding and care, this difficult passage can become a turning point. Not a breakdown, but a breakthrough. The Kundalini phenomenon is neither pure myth nor pure pathology. It sits at the crossroads of biology, psychology, and spirituality, and it disrupts every box we try to place human experience into. So if you're here because something strange is happening inside you, something you can't explain, can't control, if your body pulses with sensations no one else feels, if doctors say it's stress or anxiety or just in your head, but deep down you know that's not the whole truth, or if you're just curious about the deeper layers of human experience, curious about why some people undergo radical inner change without warning or plan, whichever path brought you here, stay with me, because what comes next may offer the language, the insight, and the guidance you've been looking for. We'll step into the work of Dr. Sannella, a man who spent years listening to people caught in this strange and powerful transformation. We'll explore what Kundalini is, why it awakens, and how it can bring both chaos and clarity. Most of all, we'll explore how to face it with your eyes open, because you are not broken, you are not alone, and you are not imagining it. Something ancient is moving through the modern man. And before we talk about healing, balance, or transcendence, we begin with one thing: understanding. When a caterpillar dissolves inside its cocoon, it doesn't know what it's becoming. It only knows that everything it once was is falling apart. That image might sound poetic, but it's also how many people describe the early stages of Kundalini awakening. Dr. Sannella wasn't looking for metaphors. He was a trained medical doctor. But in the late 1970s, he started documenting cases that didn't fit into any medical textbook. He encountered people who weren't sick in any traditional sense, but whose nervous systems were going through something dramatic and unexplainable. These individuals came from all walks of life, people with no prior interest in spirituality, and yet all of them were describing similar experiences: energy rushing through their bodies, strange internal visions, deep emotional shifts. Many had never heard the word Kundalini before, but they all said the same thing: something is happening to me. I don't know what, but it feels real. Dr. Sannella offered the same reassurance again and again. You're not losing your mind, you're gaining a new perspective. What he meant was this: when Kundalini energy awakens, the body doesn't malfunction, it begins to reorganize. The nervous system starts to rewire. Old emotional patterns surface. Identity itself starts to loosen. It can feel like everything is falling apart, but it's often the beginning of something deeper taking shape. Kundalini manifesting symptoms aren't just random. Over time, Sannella noticed a pattern, a kind of natural rhythm to the process, beginning with physical manifestations, moving into emotional upheavals, and culminating in psychological transformations. This sequence suggests a structured unfolding, akin to a natural developmental process, rather than a pathological episode. Understanding this rhythm provides reassurance to those undergoing such experiences, highlighting that these symptoms may be part of a transformative process rather than signs of mental illness. It often starts with a trigger. Sometimes it's gradual, other times sudden. A breathwork session, a meditation retreat, or even a personal crisis can set something in motion. People describe a surge of energy, rising, flowing, but completely unfamiliar. That's when the physical and emotional shifts begin. As the process deepens, inner experiences start to expand. People dream more vividly. They start seeing internal imagery, colors, shapes, symbols. Old memories resurface. Time can feel distorted. Synchronicities seem to increase. Life begins to feel symbolic, even surreal. But this phase isn't just mystical or exciting. For many, it's also destabilizing. Emotions swing rapidly. Grief, joy, anxiety, awe, often without any clear reason. Some feel emotionally flooded, as if their subconscious is pouring out into the open. It can be exhausting and frightening. Relationships often suffer. Some withdraw. Others search desperately for help that makes sense of what's happening. If the person stays with the process, something else begins to unfold. Transformation. Old emotional wounds and trauma begin to surface, sometimes linked with physical pain. One person might feel tension in their chest when an old grief emerges. Another might feel nausea when repressed anger comes to the surface. It's as if the energy is clearing out the system, physically, emotionally, and psychologically. And yet, even in the middle of this storm, many people report a strange inner awareness. A part of them watches it all unfold with calm and clarity. It's as if their everyday identity is unraveling, and something deeper, the witness, the soul, the observing self, is slowly stepping forward. Eventually, in some cases, the system begins to settle. The body calms down. The intense symptoms lessen. The person begins to understand what's happening, not through theory, but through direct experience. They become less reactive. Their thoughts feel quieter. A sense of stability returns. Not the old kind, but something deeper and more grounded. They begin to live differently, not because they chased enlightenment, but because something inside them changed. But, and this is crucial, not everyone reaches this stage. Many people get stuck in the chaos. Some are misdiagnosed with psychiatric disorders. Others repress the process with medication or fear. Some turn to unqualified spiritual teachers and end up more lost than before. Many people don't get lost because the energy is harmful, but because they weren't ready for what it would bring up. When this force starts to move, it doesn't just create physical sensations, it pulls up old pain, deep fears, and unresolved emotions. If a person hasn't built enough inner strength or self-awareness, it can feel overwhelming. Without a steady mind, a stable nervous system, or a clear way to make sense of the experience, the process can break down. The energy doesn't create suffering, it exposes what's already there. And without the right support in the right mindset, that exposure can feel like too much to handle. This is why Sannella wrote his book, not to romanticize Kundalini, but to demystify it, to give language to those who feel like they're falling apart, to say there is a map. Others have walked this path. You are not the first. Kundalini activation is a multifaceted process, spiritual, physiological, and psychological, that when navigated with awareness and guidance leads to profound transformation and realization of one's fullest potential. That's what we'll explore next. Not just what Kundalini does, but what it wants, where it leads, and how this ancient intelligence can turn pain into transformation, if you know how to move with it. You cannot tame a lightning bolt, but you can learn how to conduct it. This was the quiet truth behind Dr. Sannella's work. He didn't see Kundalini as a mystical fantasy or a psychiatric delusion. He saw it as real, a biological, psychological, and spiritual force that could awaken suddenly in modern people, often without warning. And when it did, it could either illuminate or overwhelm, depending on one thing: preparation. The energy itself isn't destructive, but if it rises in a system that's unprepared, physically, emotionally, or psychologically, it's like igniting a fire without a hearth to hold it. What follows isn't transformation, it's chaos. And that's where many people spiral. Not because the energy is wrong, but because the vessel isn't strong enough yet. Sannella noticed a pattern. People who had done some inner work, those who had developed emotional awareness, resilient nerves, and a stable sense of self, tended to weather the process more smoothly. The symptoms were still intense, but they didn't unravel them. There was something inside them that could hold the experience. It had nothing to do with being morally superior. It had everything to do with biological and psychological readiness. Like an electrical current needs insulated wires, Kundalini needs a nervous system that isn't frayed by trauma, fear, or confusion. Without that grounding, the surge can short-circuit the psyche, disorienting rather than awakening. This is where true containment begins, not in controlling the energy, but in preparing outer and inner containers. So what does that container look like? It's built from simple, grounded materials, emotional honesty, consistent daily routines, a capacity to feel without being overwhelmed, supportive relationships, a worldview flexible enough to hold paradox, joy and grief, expansion and fear, collapse and rebirth. Without this foundation, the fire has nowhere to go. It either leaks into chaos or burns too hot, too fast. But even with a prepared container, Sannella warned that readiness doesn't mean immunity. Kundalini energy does not move in a simple upward line. Rather, it flows cyclically, rising to amplify presence, ecstasy, and self-awareness, then descending to surface repressed personal and collective unconscious material. This dynamic interplay is at the heart of what he called the psycho-spiritual loop, a feedback cycle that can either deepen awakening or create confusion if left unrecognized. As Kundalini energy ascends through the body, it doesn't merely activate spiritual experiences. It also brings to the surface painful, unresolved psychological material. The awakening process, therefore, becomes a catalyst for deep psychological purification. Individuals may cycle through periods of spiritual insight, followed by emotional upheaval, as the energy continuously interacts with and reveals layers of the psyche. This cyclical nature is the essence of the psycho-spiritual loop. Understanding this concept is crucial for those undergoing Kundalini awakening. It normalizes the oscillation between blissful states and challenging emotional episodes, highlighting that both are integral to the transformative journey. Recognizing the psycho-spiritual loop can prevent misinterpretation of these experiences as pathological, fostering a more compassionate and informed approach to spiritual growth. This is why integration matters. And by integration, we don't just mean symptom relief. We mean becoming real, becoming whole. The deeper aim of Kundalini isn't to elevate you into some spiritual fantasy. It's to burn through the layers that aren't true. The defenses you built to survive, the roles you learned to play, the pain you buried so deeply you forgot it was even yours. This energy doesn't let you bypass what hurts. It brings it all forward and asks you to face it fully. But many try to skip this part. They chase the highs, the visions, the euphoria, the mysticism, without building the foundation. They want transcendence without going through the transformation process. They want escape without holding themselves responsible. But it doesn't work that way. Without grounding, without honest inner work, the energy has nowhere solid to land. Instead of integration, what follows is fragmentation. Sannella saw this clearly. He met people who had wrapped their identity around Kundalini, meditated obsessively, abandoned their relationships and routines, and yet inside they were splitting, losing touch with reality, losing trust in themselves. What they called awakening was actually a loss of center, loss of the self. So he taught something simple, but radical. Slow down, ground the fire. Let the energy move through your body, your emotions, your daily life. Don't try to escape it. Learn to carry it. This meant eating well, sleeping regularly, moving your body, talking to people, doing work that keeps your body, mind, and heart connected to the here and now on earth. It meant not hiding from what you felt, but finding safe ways to express it. Because in the end, the true test of transformation isn't how far out you can go. It's how deeply you can stay here, present and whole, while your inner world changes shape. Another thing Sannella pointed out, something often forgotten in spiritual circles, is that not every symptom should be spiritualized. Sometimes what appears to be a mystical crisis is actually a medical one. If someone had seizures, he didn't assume it was awakening. He checked first for epilepsy. If someone saw visions, he didn't assume spiritual insight. He explored first neurological causes. His reverence for Kundalini never replaced his responsibility as a physician. This balanced view is rare. Some teachers idealize the fire, treating all suffering as divine. Others dismiss it entirely, calling it delusion or dysfunction. But Sannella stood in the middle. He honored the mystery without abandoning the science. He held the door open for transformation without letting people fall through it. And because of that, people began to feel seen, not just as patients, not just as seekers, but as whole humans. struggling to make sense of something vast. His work reminded us that the body matters, that grounding matters, that truth doesn't require abandoning reason, it requires integrating it. So what does Kundalini really want from you? Not worship, not fear, not denial, not obsession. It wants surrender, but not collapse. It wants presence, but not fixation. It wants your truth, not borrowed beliefs or grandiose dreams. It wants integration, not escape. To move with this energy, you must learn to walk two paths at once. One inward, toward silence, introspection, the unknown, and one outward, toward relationships, responsibilities, and daily life. This is the paradox of awakening. The deeper you go within, the more alive you must become out here. Because Kundalini is not the goal, it is the force that clears the path. The shaking, the purging, the visions, the grief. These are not punishments. They are invitations to shed what no longer serves, to build a self that is both open and rooted, to become more human, not less, to become a vessel, not a victim. And only then, when the ego softens, when the heart is honest, when the psyche is stable, can this energy do what it was always meant to do. Not just awaken you, but slowly, patiently make you whole. They say when the serpent stirs, the soul begins to remember its origin beyond time and space. But what they don't say, what almost no one prepares you for, is that this kind of remembering doesn't feel beautiful at first. It feels like unraveling, like something inside you is dying, not physically, but psychologically. The death of who you thought you were, the collapse of the stories you used to tell yourself to feel safe, the loss of the identity you spent a lifetime building. Dr. Sannella saw this again and again in his patients. Some were longtime meditators deeply rooted in spiritual practice. Others had never picked up a single book on yoga. But once the energy awakened, their lives began to shift in similar ways. Jobs that once felt stable suddenly felt hollow. Relationships that once seemed secure began to fall apart. Emotions rose unpredictably. Joy, then terror, then numbness, then awe. Everything familiar felt unstable. And beneath it all, a quiet, persistent sense that something deep was being rearranged. He described this as a reorganization of the psyche, one that often came with major shifts in identity, values, and even perception of reality. In simple terms, the energy doesn't just flow through you, it changes you, and it asks a confronting question: who are you without your routines, your roles, your masks? This is where he turned to Jung's insight. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, because the psyche doesn't just contain light, it also contains shadow. And when this energy rises, it doesn't just activate insight, it exposes what has been hidden. Many patients began having vivid inner experiences, dreams, visions, and spontaneous images of snakes, spirals, fire, floods, archetypal symbols rising from deep within. These weren't delusions. They were unconscious messages surfacing, symbols that had been waiting for acknowledgement. Some feared they were losing their minds, but Sannella held space for a different possibility. He reminded them, as Jung once said, the psychotic drowns in the same waters in which the mystic swims with delight. The difference isn't in the depth, it's in the capacity to stay afloat. That's the razor's edge. This process can look like madness. It can feel like chaos. But it might be something else entirely. Not a collapse, but an initiation. Still, none of this is romantic. Sannella was honest. Awakening often pulls people back through their unresolved history, emotional regressions, childhood wounds, old fears. Not as punishment to bear unwillingly, but as an opportunity to integrate consciously. The energy moves through the body like a deep emotional detox, flushing out what no longer serves. What appears as pathology in one context, Sannella wrote, may be understood as transformation in another. The key is not repression, but integration. And that's what he offered. Not a cure, not a miracle, but a real container. Not just the biological body, though that matters, but a psychological vessel strong enough to hold what the energy brings, its beauty and its terror. A place within where intensity can rise without breaking the structure. Think of it like the walls of a furnace, not there to suppress the fire, but to give it shape, to let it do its work without destroying everything in its path. And then there's the attitude, the way we meet the energy. Because you don't fight this process, and you don't idolize it either. You relate to it with humility, with curiosity, with the willingness to stay present even when it hurts, even when it confuses, even when it dismantles everything you thought you were. Different traditions have offered different names for this attitude. Some call it surrender. Others speak of bhakti, or disciplined devotion to truth. Carl Jung tried to express it through the language of individuation, the lifelong task of becoming whole by integrating the unconscious into conscious life. And Sannella, like Jung, didn't wrap it in metaphor or ritual. He spoke of it clinically, yet compassionately. He saw the energy as real and the suffering as real too. But he believed in the possibility of meaning through the struggle. He called for balance, grounded living, psychological maturity, staying close to your body, close to your relationships, close to reality. He didn't glorify the symptoms. He didn't dismiss them either. He offered a third way, witnessing without losing yourself, learning to contain, to reflect, to integrate bit by bit. Because this isn't just energy. It's not just symbolism or chaos. It is life itself intensified. It is the force of becoming. It is destruction, yes, but purposeful. Cleansing, clarifying, uncompromising. It doesn't come to reward or punish. It comes to reshape, to return you to something essential, less constructed, more whole. And to do that, it doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for readiness. It asks for the right perspective. And most of all, it asks for the right attitude. Not one of fear or fantasy, but of grounded reverence. And so, from this place of reverent containment, Sannella guided people towards something deeper, not just surviving the fire, but learning how to walk with it. He encouraged those in crisis to journal their experiences, not to dissect or interpret them too quickly, but to give their psyche room to speak in its own language. He advised allowing dreams to unfold without forcing conclusions, to rest more, to eat grounding foods, to feel the earth beneath their feet, to reduce stimulation, screens, noise, drama, all of it. Because the nervous system, when lit up by this energy, needs simplicity, stillness, space, and most of all, he emphasized this: stay present, no matter how wild the current becomes, no matter how unrecognizable you feel. Because once the awakening begins, you cannot reverse it. You cannot package it neatly or control its pace. You can only surrender, and that surrender is not weakness. It is trust. Not blind trust in a deity or doctrine, but trust in the deeper intelligence moving through you. The part of you that knows how to heal, even when your mind doesn't understand it. Jung once wrote, "What you resist persists. What you accept transforms." This became a quiet mantra for many passing through Kundalini's fire. When fear came, they breathed into it. When pain surfaced, they stopped asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What is this trying to show me?" When their sense of self collapsed, they began to wonder, maybe what's dying isn't me, but everything that is not me. But this trust is not easy, especially when your nervous system feels hijacked by something greater than your will. When your thoughts race, your sleep disappears, your body trembles without cause. When loved ones don't understand, this is the moment so many people feel most alone. And this is where Sannella's voice mattered most. He warned that spiritual awakening must never be isolated from psychological care, that a mystic without psychological understanding becomes vulnerable to confusion and collapse, that science and spirituality must walk together when the soul catches fire of Kundalini. So he built bridges between psychiatry and sacred texts, between yoga and neuroscience, between the language of chakras and the language of symptoms. He translated the mystical into the clinical and the clinical into the mystical. He didn't offer promises of enlightenment. He didn't glamorize Kundalini. What he offered was something far more valuable: a mirror, one that reflected the whole of awakening, not just the bliss, but the unraveling, not just the insight, but the disorientation, not just the light, but the shadow. Because in the end, the real journey is not to escape your humanity, but to sanctify it, to let Kundalini energy move not just through your spine, but through your emotions, your memories, your gut, your grief, through the parts of you you've rejected, hidden, numbed, through your childhood pain, your adult shame, your quiet hopes. To become whole is not to bypass the fire. It is to walk through it, aware, alive, and anchored. And when the fire finally settles, when the currents soften and the storm quiets, you do not emerge as someone new. And that, according to Sannella, is not the end. It is the beginning. So what happens after the storm? What happens when the flooding visions recede? When the body stops shaking? When the light no longer blazes, but quietly glows within? And silence becomes louder than sound? This is the part no one prepares you for. Because the ancient energy of Kundalini doesn't return you to where it found you. It doesn't ask for permission before rewiring how you feel, how you love, how you live. And when the dramatic symptoms settle, many are left not with clarity, but with a strange kind of emptiness. Not a void of loss, a void of possibility. And this is where people often get lost. Not in the chaos of awakening, but in the stillness that follows. In the eerie calm after the energetic storm. Dr. Lee Sannella observed that the real danger is not just in the Kundalini rising, but in the ego trying to reform too quickly, trying to rush back to stability, trying to stitch the old story back together without recognizing that the pages have changed. He wrote, premature attempts to reconstruct identity can interfere with the deeper integrative processes that Kundalini sets into motion. In simpler terms, don't rush the meaning. Let the meaning ripen. Sannella described Kundalini as a wave, not a straight line. Some days you'll feel grounded, clear, present. Other days you'll feel fractured again, tender, raw. You might feel your heart burst open in love, only to be swept back into abandonment hours later. But this is not regression, it is refinement. Here the teachings of Carl Jung re-enter like old companions. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he also warned that this privilege comes only through descent, not ascension into spiritual light, but a descent into the roots of the self, into the basement of the psyche, into the darkness we are taught to avoid. And Dr. Sannella agreed. He emphasized that Kundalini is not a ladder to enlightenment. It is a descent into the soul's underworld. And in that descent, we often encounter not just personal memories, but collective images, ancestral echoes, and symbolic visions that don't fit into rational frameworks. These are not symptoms of psychosis, Sannella insisted. These are messages from the unconscious, delivered in the mythic language of the soul. And if we stop judging them, if we listen instead of analyze, they begin to speak. To make this point, Sannella quoted Joseph Campbell, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." And for many, that cave is not somewhere distant or exotic. It is inside. Inside the grief you never processed. Inside the shame you buried in childhood. Inside the body that remembers what the mind has forgotten. This is why Sannella emphasized embodiment during the integration phase. Because you cannot think your way through Kundalini, you cannot meditate it away, you must feel your way through. You must incarnate it. He urged his patients to bring soft attention to the body, not to label sensations, but to welcome them, to feel the pressure in the chest without calling it anxiety, to notice the flutter in the gut without assuming fear, to let the body be an ally, not a battleground. He wrote, "Those who resist embodiment tend to experience more disruption. Those who accept the body as part of the awakening journey find greater balance." In other words, stop trying to go up. Come down, come home. Because Kundalini is not just about light shooting through your spine. It is about reclaiming your full humanity. It is not about escaping the world. It is about being reborn within it. This is the path that Dr. Lee Sannella laid out. Not an escape from suffering, but a deeper embrace of reality. Not a promise of mystical bliss, but a reminder that there always is some reason behind madness. And this brings us to the most misunderstood part of the journey. The part that Dr. Lee Sannella called the real work, integration. In the Kundalini experience, he described how the most critical stage in any Kundalini awakening is not the awakening itself, but what happens after. When the visions fade, when the body stops trembling, and when you're left with a life that suddenly feels unfamiliar. This is the stage that Western medicine often misdiagnoses as psychosis, and that Eastern mysticism sometimes romanticizes as enlightenment. But Sannella asked something much harder of his patients: to stand in the ambiguity, to face their post-awakening selves without rejecting the experience, or inflating it into something it's not. It means bringing the divine fire down to earth. It means realizing that your spiritual experience is not an escape, but an invitation. An invitation to relate differently to your past, not with shame, but with honesty. To your partner, not as a source of frustration, but as a mirror. To your ambition, not as ego, but as energy-seeking expression. To your pain, not as punishment, but as a message from the soul. Sannella observed a consistent pattern. Many people who awakened Kundalini spontaneously had lived for years with emotional repression, rigid belief systems, or an internal divide between intellect and intuition. The Kundalini didn't create chaos. It exposed what was already fractured. One of his patients, a well-known academic, began to alternate between states of bliss and episodes of ego dissolution. His identity cracked open, not because he was unstable, but because the foundation of his inner life had never been fully integrated. The treatment wasn't medication, it was truthful exploration, supported by meditation, somatic awareness, and deep psychological grounding. And this is where practice becomes essential, because integration is not a concept, it's a discipline. It's the daily ritual of honoring your inner transformation with small symbolic acts that root the spiritual into the physical. For example, a simple but powerful practice is mindful breathing combined with gentle movement. Feeling the breath move through the body, noticing where energy flows or where tension hides. This quiet embodiment helps create a sense of safety. It reminds the nervous system, you are not being overwhelmed, you are waking up. Another helpful tool is journaling or creative expression. When Kundalini energy stirs the unconscious, words may not come easily, but images, symbols, dreams, and raw emotion can find their way to the page. You don't need to interpret everything. Sometimes just letting it exist on paper is enough. Through this, you give the ineffable a shape. You give the formless a voice. These are not coping mechanisms. They are rituals of reverence. They are ways to say, this is sacred, even if I don't understand it yet, even if it's messy. Because that's what integration really is. Not solving the mystery, but living with it. Not rushing to closure, but deepening into presence. And when you begin to live from that place, you stop asking, was that a spiritual awakening or a mental breakdown? And you begin to ask a deeper question. How can I let this change me? Not just in theory, but in the way I live, love, and listen. Once you stop trying to interpret your awakening and begin to live with it, a deeper clarity begins to emerge. Not in the form of answers, but in the form of presence. Dr. Sannella quoted Carl Jung, "Enlightenment is not imagining figures of light, but making the darkness conscious." And that is precisely what the Kundalini process demands. Not to escape darkness, not to bypass pain, but to become more honest with what lives inside. Kundalini does not ask you to float upward into the bliss of higher realms. It asks you to walk forward with both heaven and hell in your heart and not look away. Kundalini alters you, sometimes gently, sometimes violently, and it leaves you with a quiet, sacred question. What do I do with this now? The truth is, there is no formula, because Kundalini awakening is not one size fits all. It's not a technique. It's not a trend. It's the most ancient energy of consciousness, awakening through you. And it doesn't care about systems or dogma. It follows only truth, and your truth is yours alone. One of Sannella's lesser-known teachings came from a line by Ramana Maharshi. Your own self-realization is the greatest service you can render the world. This resonated deeply with him, because so many people after awakening try to immediately do something with it. Start a spiritual business, launch a healing practice, fix society. But Sannella urged them to slow down. The first service is inward. Let the energy shape you before you try to shape others. And this is where his approach was not just wise, but profoundly human. He knew what it felt like to question your sanity, to feel emotionally raw, to be overwhelmed by visions or silence or grief with no name. And so he didn't offer platitudes like, trust the divine plan. He offered structure, containment, grounding. But no awakening is complete until it touches the world. After the intensity of inner transformation, Kundalini inevitably begins to spill outward into your relationships, your family, your work, your everyday life. Dr. Sannella saw this phase not as an afterthought, but as the real test of integration. Because it's one thing to feel whole in solitude, it's another to stay open-hearted in a world that may not understand you. Many of his patients describe the same pain: isolation, misunderstanding, disconnection, trying to explain their experience only to be met with confusion. Friends and family sometimes saw their changes as signs of instability. But Sannella reframed this as part of the growth. Not rejection, but realignment. Kundalini, he said, doesn't just awaken you, it rearranges your life. It asks you to see clearly which connections nurture your truth and which dilute it. One patient, a middle-aged woman, went through a profound transformation. She could no longer tolerate surface-level conversations. She withdrew from old habits and roles. Her family feared she was slipping into depression, but in therapy, using Sannella's approach, she came to see what was really happening. Her sensitivity was not a breakdown, but a deepening. She was shedding what no longer resonated and learning how to live from a more honest place. And that's the work of this stage, learning to carry your truth without needing everyone to validate it. Kundalini can trigger unresolved wounds, anxiety, depression, moments that feel like psychosis. But these are not failures. They are revelations. Old defenses rising up to be seen, felt, and healed. Instead of repressing them, he taught people to meet these states with compassion and context, not as clinical symptoms, but as psychic material being reorganized by the sacred energy moving through them. To navigate this social re-entry, he offered a simple image: a bridge. In moments of relational tension, imagine a bridge connecting your inner world with another's. Silently affirm, "May I listen deeply and may they hear my truth." It doesn't solve everything, but it softens the edge. And just as important, build your social circle. Not a crowd, but a few souls who can bear witness without judgment. A therapist, a spiritual guide, a trusted friend. Someone who doesn't need to get it to stand by you. Because while Kundalini is deeply personal, it is never meant to be walked alone. And as this journey nears its close, we must ask, what will we carry forward? Not just as knowledge, but as felt truth. To Dr. Lee Sannella, the true completion of the Kundalini process was not some dazzling revelation, not visions, not psychic powers, not eternal bliss. It was something far more difficult and far more human: the ability to live an ordinary life with extraordinary awareness. He wrote, "The final phase of the Kundalini process is not transcendence. It is incarnation, to bring the full current of awakening into the details of daily existence." And to some, this may sound disappointing. After all the storms, the ego still hopes for a grand finale, a final proof that you've arrived, a title, a platform, a crown of light. But real integration is quieter than that. It's not about claiming a new identity. It's about letting go of all the false ones. It's the slow repair of the nervous system, the rebuilding of trust with your own mind, the quiet return to your relationships, not as someone enlightened, but as someone honest. Sannella warned of one last trap, one that catches many after awakening: the spiritual persona, the subtle mask that says, "I am awake now," while beneath it, old wounds still ache. He didn't want his patients to become teachers. He wanted them to become real. And so for him, the most sacred stage was not the ecstasy. It was this final phase, the return, where you stop seeking and start living. This he called downward integration, not rising above the world, but descending into it with eyes wide open. He quoted Meister Eckhart, "God is not found in the soul by adding anything, but by a process of subtraction." Subtraction means shedding illusions, letting go of the need to be seen as special, letting go of the belief that awakening must look a certain way. And in that emptiness, something still and beautiful begins to grow. Stillness, clarity, humor, love. Sannella also addressed a dangerous myth, that awakening means the end of suffering. He was clear it doesn't. What it offers is a new relationship with suffering. Pain still visits, fear still whispers. But now there's a witness inside you, one who doesn't panic, one who knows how to stay. He wrote, "The awakened individual may still feel fear, sadness, or doubt, but these emotions arise like clouds. They do not define the sky." That to him was the real gift of Kundalini, freedom not from life, but in life. He quoted Krishnamurti to remind us, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. So if you no longer fit in, that's okay. You may see through things you once believed. You may no longer be able to pretend. But Sannella's advice here was soft and deeply compassionate. Don't isolate, relate. Not everyone needs to understand you to walk beside you. Let your presence do the talking. Let your kindness speak your truth. You're not here to convert anyone. You're here to live clearly, sincerely, freely. And when the fire has settled, when the visions have passed, what remains is not fireworks. It's something deeper than ecstasy. It is love, not romantic love, not mystical longing, but the kind of love that looks back on every moment of your life and says, I see it now. Even the pain had purpose. And so we arrive, not at an ending, but a new beginning, wiser, softer, truer. The sacred wound has become the sacred portal, and the energy that once shook you now walks quietly beside you in every breath. For those watching, whether you're curious, struggling, or in awe of your own process, this message is yours. You are not broken. You are being reassembled. The fire was never here to destroy you. It came to refine you. And if you let it, if you trust the unfolding, it will not just awaken you. It will return you to yourself. Your time is valuable. Thank you for sharing it.